All right, so the Israeli voters are all set to head to the polling booths for an unprecedented third election in less than a span of 12 months. We'll be decoding the political crisis that is unfolding in Israel. But the big question, of course, is can this third general election in a space of less than a year break the political deadlock? Now, candidates and campaign slogans remain largely unchanged. The ideological sticking points are rooted. Voting patterns are again expected to remain consistent even in this third general election. And there is no certainty that this third election will break the political deadlock. Now, the Israeli parliament has already failed to agree on a coalition after two previous elections that were held in April and September last year. And even before voting commences today, the possibility of a fourth general election, some say, actually looms large. All right, now to give us more perspective as to what can be expected out of this third general election in Israel, we are joined by Mr. Arsen Ostrovsky, who's an international human rights lawyer and also a West Asia expert, who is now joining us live. Mr. Ostrovsky, let me begin by asking you this. Now, this is the third general election that is taking place in less than 12 months in Israel. There is a political stalemate there. And also Netanyahu, in over 1.5 decades that he's managed to be the prime minister in Israel, is facing a sticky election. He's also been indicted for charges of fraud and bribery. How are the people within Israel approaching this third election?
Hi, good morning. I mean, look, it's barely 6 a.m. here in the morning, and I honestly feel, and as do so many other people, that it's like the film Groundhog Day. Here we are again. What do you think would be here the second time? And we certainly didn't think would be here a third time. And I can guarantee you that we most certainly pray that we're not here a fourth time doing this interview. Look, I think people want this process to be finished. People want this process to be concluded, a government to be formed, and the proper business of day-to-day governance of this country to commence. There's, a lot of frustration, a lot of apathy as well, with the politicians, with the leadership, in order to finally get this done on this occasion. But as you said in the introduction, there is no guarantee that will actually happen. There is not a lot that has tangibly changed between elections 1 and 2 and between elections 2 and 3. At this stage, it still seems the most likely option will be more or less stalemate between the two leading parties, unable to form a bloc. That said, in the last week or so of the campaign, Prime Minister Netanyahu has had sort of the marginal edge, if you believe the polls here, and he's creeping a little bit closer towards being able to form a right-leaning coalition and get the magical 61 seats. But we won't know until later tonight how the polls have, or how the voters have turned out. More importantly, it's a process that may take weeks, and as we saw from the last election, months, in fact, to see if a government can in fact be formed.
Absolutely indeed, Mr. Ostrovsky. This, of course, is a situation that's been described as beyond unprecedented. Never in Israel's history have there been 3 successive general elections to try elect a prime minister. But talking about Netanyahu, he appears to be on a pretty sticky wicket. He's facing criminal charges of fraud and bribery. How is all of that playing out in this election?
Look, to be honest, I don't think it's making any significant impact. The charges have not come as a shock or as a surprise to anyone, really. It's certainly not to his voter base. So people that will be voting for him, and in fact that voted for him the previous occasion, they knew this was forthcoming. So this isn't going to shock anyone. Really, this isn't going to shock anyone in Israel at all. What we're seeing today is, I think, it's not a traditional left-right split in terms of politics, but it's more or less pro-Bibi and anti-Bibi camps. And it's a question of not only which camp, and more importantly, which one turns out to vote. Indeed, because last election, there was a little bit of voter apathy and some of the voters did not turn out to vote. Certainly some of the traditional Likud and the right-wing voters. So we'll interesting to see what happens today and whether Benny Gantz is able to motivate his voter base to come out and vote as well. Because at the end of the day, you're not necessarily voting for a leader, but you're voting for, who can make, or who will be able to make coalition of 61, a minimum 61 seats.
Right. Now, for almost about a decade and a half, Benjamin Netanyahu was virtually unchallenged on the political spectrum of Israel. But now Benny Gantz has emerged and he's put up a very, very credible fight. It's a neck-and-neck race. Benny Gantz is a former Israeli army chief turned politician. Tell us more about Benny Gantz and his style of politics and how different that it is from Netanyahu.
Look, a lot of Benny Gantz's politics is completely untested. I mean, this is his first run as a politician. He finished his very illustrious term as Chief of Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, mostly a very successful term. And between that and running for Prime Minister, he had a small period, questionably whether how successful, but he had a small period as in the private sector. So a lot of his leadership is untested in the political field, on the battlefield. It's unquestionable, but on the political field, it's untested. His blue and white party is essentially an amalgamation of a number of different parties. And because they take somewhat centrist roles, it's very difficult to pinpoint them ideologically on issues of foreign policy or national security. It's arguably there's very little difference between the major parties on issues like Iran, on the Trump peace plan. There's a lot of consensus. On domestic issues, we're starting to see a lot more difference on religion and state, on the economy and the like. But it boils down to, to character. Netanyahu is seen as, by some, as a very divisive figure, and most of them could. He's seen as someone who has brought the country, great stability, economic strength, and security. But Gantz is seen someone who has very clear conscience and credibility, but whether he can actually master enough seats to form a coalition and unseat Netanyahu, that's a very big question mark.
Absolutely indeed. And also leading up to this election, a lot of people have been looking at the Middle East peace plan announced by Donald Trump. A lot of people have turned around and said that this Middle East peace plan in many ways supports the policies of Netanyahu. And Netanyahu also in his campaigning promises has been upping the ante. In September, he said that he would like to annex the Jordan Valley. And just about a week back, he also spoke about building settlements in East Jerusalem in an area that is known as EION. How is all of this being viewed within Israeli politics?
Look, I mean, to be honest, I don't think it's fair to say that this plan favors Netanyahu because what you've seen, and very quickly you saw that both Netanyahu and Benny Gantz have overwhelmingly embraced the Trump peace plan, as in fact have a number of the other parties, including Avigdor Lieberman, who may well be kingmaker here, a number of other parties on the right wing, and even some on the left have expressed support. So many of the key issues that we're talking about here, not just the Iran deal, but, for example, maintaining Jerusalem as united and undivided, on issues like the Jewish people's connection to Judea and Samaria, what I call the West Bank. There's very little difference between the major parties. So a lot of the issues that are contained within the Trump peace plan are very much mainstream consensus issues here in Israel. Certainly when it comes to the two major parties, for which there's very little difference about that. At the end of the day, I think the Trump peace plan might favor Netanyahu, only because these are some issues like Jerusalem, Jordan Valley, Judea and Samaria, that he has certainly been pushing for, calling for some time, for a number of years now. But that said, Benny Gantz has also very much embraced the peace plan, and you saw that when he went to Washington, D.C. as well and met with President Trump.
All right. And also one of the other issues that I would want you to weigh in on is how is the novel coronavirus outbreak likely, if at all, to have an impact on voting today? Will people line up and crowd around these polling stations? Because even within Israel, there are reports of anywhere from 3 to 7 patients having been infected because of the novel coronavirus.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the Israelis are a resilient bunch. They're not going to let anything or anyone, certainly not the coronavirus, get in the way of having their say. There are some concerns, but I think the Israeli authorities have taken extreme precautions here. There's been a number of voting areas and booths set up specifically for those, even to allow those that have been infected to be able to vote in a safe environment. So I don't think that in the end the coronavirus will have a major impact in terms of voter turnout.
All right, we'll have to wait and watch for that. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Arsen Ostrovsky, for joining us and giving us all those insights into this very interesting election, the third general...